For the third straight year, Temple men's and women's basketball go winless in the AAC tournament.
Still, the future of the women's program looks promising, while the men's future is uncertain. Yes, men's basketball has a help wanted sign for its head coaching position. Our final edition of Courts in Session is live, and it starts right now.
Hello and welcome into the final episode of Courts in Session. She's Emilie Cochrane and I'm Luke Meli. After 4 seasons and 108 games as head coach of the men's basketball team, Aaron Mckie is out as head coach.
But he's not leaving entirely. He's taking on a very new, different role here on North Broad. We now send it over to our very own Brielle Berry with the latest. Hey, Brielle.
Thanks, guys. On Monday, Athletic Director Arthur Johnson announced that Temple has parted ways with Aaron Mckie. Mckie spent his last 9 years as a coach, 4 of them as head coach and 5 as an assistant under Fran Dunphy. While Mckie is leaving the team, he's not leaving Temple entirely. Mckie will now serve as the special advisor for athletics. In Mckie's 4 seasons as head coach on North Broad, he finished with a 52-56 overall record and went 30-37 in conference play. In the AAC tournament, Mckie was 0 for 3, and this season, Temple finished 16-16 overall with a 10-8 conference record, with that notable win over the #1 ranked Houston Cougars. Temple says the search for a new head coach will take place immediately. We'll take a look at that part of the puzzle a little bit later. For now, I'll send it back to the desk with Luke and Emilie.
Thanks, Brielle. So let's get back to that game that likely had a part in the parting ways of head coach Mckie. AAC quarterfinals versus Cincy. Hyseer Miller dishes the ball to Zach Hicks, almost loses it, but manages to control it, eventually sinking in a beautiful 3. Jameel Reynolds, fighting through contact here, finishes on the left side to put the Owls up by double digits. Next up, the Bearcats have the ball. Landers Noli fakes it twice before making this 3 look absolutely effortless from deep to tie up the game. But take a look at this. Damian Dunn skims the bottom of the net with this extremely deep 3. Dunn was expected to take control without Caleb Battle, but he only scored 12 points into the second half. It's going to be Noli with the open look. This was one of his 4 threes on the day. Here you can see Hicks is struggling to find an open man here, and he ends up turning the ball over to Noli, the star of the show. He takes this one all the way down to seal the dunk. It was a tough end to the season for the Owls. They lose by 30. Final score 84-54.
Everybody tried to win it on their own. A little too much one-on-one, and we didn't get the ball moving the way that I wanted it to move. You know, coaches, you get hired, and at some point you're going to get fired or whatever the case may be. But I don't lose sleep over that. I want to continue to grow these kids and help this program as best as I can. I want to continue to play. I want to play in March and all of those different things. We had every opportunity during the course of the year to do so, and we didn't take advantage of it.
If you're wondering why Aaron Mckie's out of a job, this is a major reason why. The lopsided loss to Cincinnati caps off a rough 3-year stretch in the AAC tournament for the men. Temple never won an AAC postseason game under Mckie, and it got worse each year. The Owls lost by 2 in 2021, by 9 in 2022, and of course by 30 this season.
Okay, so now let's kind of recap this game. So defense was an issue in Temple's matchup versus Cincinnati. They were so concerned about guys like David DeJulius and Landers Nolly II that they forgot that Cincinnati does have other guys on the team that can score, such as Skillings Jr. And he's actually a Jersey guy, so he's local, went to Roman Catholic, and he kind of racked up a ton of accolades in that game. He had 20 points against Temple, which was actually his career high, and he's someone that's only averaging about 5 points per game. So to quadruple his scoring average was pretty impressive in that matchup. Like I said, Roman Catholic guy, so he knows a lot of guys on the team as well. And also David DeJulius, named to third team All-AAC, one of 2 players on Cincinnati named to the All-Conference team. He had a 16-game stretch of 5 or more assists, which actually led the nation at the time, but he only had 4 points against Temple. So Temple did a good job defending him, but they forgot about those other guys that can score as well. And also Victor Locken, 7 blocks, which actually tied the AAC individual record, which was just really impressive. So Temple just had a hard time stopping guys on defense.
Yeah, and you looked at Temple's lack of defense, and I'm going to go over to the offensive side. Damian Dunn, Heiser Miller, and Jaleel White took the 3 most shots in this game for the Owls. They shot a combined 9 for 39. That's 23%. When your guys that are taking the most shots are struggling that much, you're really not going to win any games. And I also want to look out to the three-point line because that involves these 3 as well. In the 2 games these teams played in the regular season, Temple made 10 threes and 8 threes against Cincinnati in those 2 games. This time, they only made 6, and they shot 25%. You're not going to win many games when you shoot that percentage that low, and you're also not really going to win many tournament games when you do it as well.
And after the win, Wes Miller, head coach, he was obviously pleased with the outcome. He said Temple is always defensively sound, athletic, extremely talented, and he said that they don't necessarily turn the ball over a lot, which is something that I found was kind of ironic and confusing because Temple turned the ball over 15 times throughout this game, and they only shot 33% from the field. Now, 10 of those 15 turnovers came from the second half. Cincinnati only had 4 in the second half, which was crazy to me. Speaking of coaches, the Help Wanted sign is up. So what do you guys think is next for this Temple program?
Well, I think when you see the lack of success with Aaron Mckie, a Temple guy, and an AD like Arthur Johnson comes in from the outside, he'll see, well, this Temple guy didn't work. I think it's going to push Arthur Johnson to go outside of maybe a big Temple or a big Philly tie. Not necessarily that you have to, but I think that's the way they're going to go. They need someone that understands this community and culture. But I think with the lack of success for Mckie, they're going to go somewhere else.
So, Luke, I'm going to kind of disagree with you on that one a little bit. Just because of Mckie's lack of success, I don't necessarily think that means that a former Temple personnel or just Philly person in general is automatically out of the running. There's a handful of former Philly and Temple guys that I can see in the running for this position, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes.
And if you think about it, this had to have been such a tough decision for everybody involved. I mean, Aaron Mckie has been a part of the Temple, Philadelphia community since he was born. He was born and raised here. He played for Temple. He played for the Sixers in the NBA. You have to think that those close ties are hard to get rid of. But when I think about it, I'm thinking, do I think he's necessarily happy with this new position? No, but I think that to some capacity, he wants to be a part of this Temple football or Temple basketball program because of the culture that he brings to the entire program.
Well, that's enough on the men's team for now. Let's look over to the women's team. 4 days before the men were eliminated, the women were down in Dickies Arena as the 9 seed taking on the 8 seed Wichita State Shockers. The Owls stepped into Dickies Arena for Diane Richardson's first conference game as head coach, looking for their first tournament win since 2020. Shockers got out to a 13-2 start, but the Owls came back. Terriana Gary hits one of her 3 three-pointers to chip away at the deficit. At the end of the opening quarter, Shamariah Duncan battles inside for 2 of her 11. Wichita State up 9 after 1, but here come Tiara East and Aaliyah Nelson. East and Nelson combined for 12 of Temple's 17 points in the quarter. The Owls cut the Shockers lead to 7 at halftime. In the second half, Amba Calkin's third 3 opens up a 17-point Wichita State lead, but here come the Owls. Gary's bucket at the buzzer is part of a 21-7 Temple run to end the third. Then in the fourth, Nelson from beyond ties it at 52. She had 22 points. But with the game winding down, Wichita State goes on a 19-9 run and puts Temple away for good. The Owls fall at Dickies Arena 71-60.
There's no magic, but there's resiliency from our team, and they knew what we were getting into, and they stepped up. And if you look at all the games, we had 7, 8 players, and we were still in every game. So that, my compliment to them for sticking in there. It was a tough game. We got down early and fought back, and just didn't come out with the win.
I was just kind of telling my team, regardless of the score, just to play hard. I mean, we came all down this way. We weren't going to go out soft, so kind of play hard.
So let's discuss what went wrong in Temple's loss to the Shockers. So to start off, they only scored 8 points in the first quarter. And this is something that I've harped on all season. The slow starts just kill Temple completely offensively. They're still playing with only 8 players, or they were still playing with only 8 players. And it's really hard for them to crawl back and kind of get back into the game. They trailed 17-8 at the end of the first. They gave up 17 points in the first quarter. And they struggled defensively in the third quarter, which is also something that I've harped on all season. The Shockers opened on an 8-0 run, and it was just really hard for Temple to try and crawl their way back into the game. In the fourth, Aaliyah Nelson kind of came out on fire, tied things up at 52. Shockers went on to score 11 of the next 13, and Temple just wasn't able to crawl back.
I want to dig into the team's third quarter progress right here. Going into the second half, the Shockers went on an 8-0 run. The score was 40-25. This was before Terriana Gary opened Temple scoring with a beautiful 3, and it ultimately cut the deficit throughout and eventually cut it down to 3 points. But unfortunately, they couldn't sustain that momentum, and by the fourth quarter, they only put up 12 points compared to 24 in the third.
And I got to give a lot of credit to Temple's big trio, Aaliyah Nelson, Terriana Gary, Tiara East. They showed up, scoring 48 of Temple's 61 points in this game. They're going to need some help going forward, but those 3 were certainly not the reason for this loss.
Absolutely.
So break time, but don't go anywhere. When we return, we will take a look at the AAC champs for both the men's and women's bracket.
Big upsets on both sides leave the top seeds watching celebrations from the sideline.
We'll be back with all the madness when Courts in Session returns. Welcome back to the men's bracket in the AAC. The first matchup was between the 8th and the 9th seeds. East Carolina topped the South Florida Bulls 73-58. UCF and Wichita State both won the last 2 games in the first round, but after advancing, both lost to Memphis and Tulane in the quarterfinals. These winning teams, along with Houston and Cincy, advanced to the semis. Houston beat Cincy and Memphis beat Tulane for a chance to compete to win it all. And we end with the upset. The nation's top team lost in that title game to the Tigers 75-65.
Of course, both Memphis and Houston heard their names called during selection show Sunday. Starting with Memphis, how far can the Tigers go?
It was a busy few hours for Memphis. Instead of cutting down the net right away after they won the championship, they actually ran straight to the media room to listen to the NCAA selection and make sure that their name was called during that time. But for the Cougars, let's remember they were without Marcus Sasser during that game, so it gave Memphis a little bit of an advantage there, but definitely not taking anything away from them. I think they've got a lot of momentum right now from both the coaches and the players. And if they do beat FAU, Purdue might need every inch of 7-foot center Zach Edey to stop the Tigers.
Well, you mentioned it. Memphis has a lot of momentum right now. They've won 7 of their last 9, and they're led by the AAC's all-time leading scorer in Kendrick Davis. They run into a tough draw in round of 32, getting 1 seed Purdue, like you mentioned, with Zach Edey. That's as far as I have them going, but I do think they beat FAU in round 1.
Oh, do you guys think that Houston can win this all?
I think a lot of it is dependent on the health of their leading scorer, Marcus Sasser. It's unknown how healthy he'll be as we move into the NCAA tournament. I think Houston's such a good team that they won't really need his 17 points per game to lead them in the first weekend, maybe both of the first 2 games. But as we saw against Memphis, this is a Houston team that's beatable. So I think that'll push them and Sasser himself to try and push that return a little bit.
So going off what you said, Luke, I don't want to say that Houston's road to the finals will be easy, but definitely working in its favor. They face the 16th seeded Northern Kentucky in the opening round, but don't jump the gun because we have seen a 16 seed upset a 1 seed before. Just take a look a few years back at what UMBC did to Virginia. But like Luke said, it is dependent on Marcus Sasser, team's best player offensively, and I would argue even defensively. So they're a completely different basketball team without him. Such a dynamic player on both ends of the floor, and Sunday's game definitely did exploit some weaknesses in Houston without him.
Absolutely. Now on to the women's side of things, where lots of basketball was played and lots of hearts were broken over the course of 4 days.
Unlike the men's side, it wasn't the top 2 seeds rolling to the title game.
From first to second to third round upsets, let's take a look. In the opening round, every higher seed won except for the 10th ranked Knights of UCF, beating 7th ranked Tulsa. In the quarterfinals, USF got stunned by Wichita State, losing 65-53. Moving on to the semis, Memphis and Wichita State fell short, which put ECU and Houston in the title game. The conference's 3rd and 4th ranked teams, and the Pirates were crowned AAC champs when they defeated the Cougars Thursday night. So how can ECU upset Texas in the first round?
Well, they've got to do it how they've played all season. That's defense. ECU forces 25 turnovers a game for their opponents. Now you look at their opponent. That's Texas, Big 12 winner, but they lost in their Big 12 final in large part to their 19 turnovers. The Longhorns, they're an offensive powerhouse. They've only scored under 60 twice this season, but on the other side, ECU holds its opponents under 50 7 times. It's strength versus strength for these two teams. Whichever strength wins out is going to be the team that wins the game.
And also keep in mind that this will be the first time ECU has made it to the Big Dance since 2007. Meanwhile, Texas is set to make its 35th NCAA appearance. So experience-wise, on a larger scale, Texas has more of an advantage, but they also don't have players like Aaliyah Moore and Sonia Morris, two of the team's leading scorers. So that could be an advantage for the Pirates.
It's time for our first break. We'll have more on the Temple men's and women's basketball team's futures on the other side. Stick with us.
Welcome back. It's been a long season for the Owls since the beginning of November, and the men have been competing against non-conference and AAC opponents. With a final record of 16-16 and a quick end to their conference championship, the Owls have a significant amount of work to do during their offseason, which now includes finding a new head coach. But before we jump into next season, we need to evaluate what got us here, the good and the bad. The Owls went through a season that screamed anything can happen. Temple beat teams like Villanova and Houston when the Cougars were ranked #1 in the country. But on the flip side, the Owls lost to teams like Wagner and Maryland Eastern Shore, which was not a good look. And the Twitter drama involving Caleb Battle was no help at the beginning of the season either, not to mention a recent argument with head coach Aaron Mckie that left him benched during a conference game against Memphis. We haven't seen him since. I think team morale is important, and the team certainly lacked that throughout the season. The continuity they had last season was much more impressive, both on and off the court. Luke Milay has more on the team's issues over at the studio set. Hey, Luke.
Hey, Emily, you mentioned a lot about consistency and continuity, and you were right. That's what this team was lacking down the stretch of the season. So I've got a play here in the game against Cincinnati late in the game. It's something that we saw a lot during this game. This is just one example of guys outside of Damian Dunn not really being able to make plays for themselves on their own. So you can play it right here. Hyzier Miller gets it over to Zach Hicks, drives baseline. Now pause it right here. Zach Hicks dribbles himself into some trouble. This is what we've seen a lot since Caleb Battle was no longer with the team for the final chunk of games. When Damian Dunn doesn't have the ball, other guys just can't really create the same way. You see Zach Hicks dribble into the double team. The baseline's a third defender. You can play it again right here. When he goes to kick it out, it's turned over. Now, I'm not picking on Zach Hicks because this is an issue for the entire team outside of Damian Dunn. It's something they're going to have to address going into next season.
Season defined as tournament or bust, it was definitely a bust for the men's team. Jameel Reynolds was out for almost 2 months with a thumb injury, and Caleb Battle didn't play in a game after February 16th. The team needs a head coach. I think it is safe to say the Owls could lose Damian Dunn to the transfer portal, and in many ways, the Owls are starting over. In the offseason, Temple should prioritize finding another big man, more shooters, and another guy who can handle the ball. In other words, they've got a lot of holes to fill, and with Mckie out, I think one person Temple should look at is Colgate head coach Matt Langle. He was an assistant under Fran Dunphy from 2006 to 2011, and an article came out the other day about Langle where he said that he will never say never to another head coach position. Definitely something to keep an eye on.
Now, you mentioned a lot about the big men filling these roles, but what about a woman? I'm thinking Dawn Staley to fill this position. I know she's thriving in South Carolina right now, but wouldn't it be so iconic for her to come back to her hometown of North Philadelphia, take over this Temple team, and show what she's really about? Because she's way more than qualified to take on this position and be the first woman to run a D1 basketball team. So I think that would just be so iconic for her.
You mentioned it. She's so much more than qualified. She would have to choose Temple more than Temple chooses her. But Brielle, I'm going to go back to your point about Langle. He's a guy that's a winner, and he's got the resume to back it up. Langle's won Patriot League Coach of the Year 4 times. He's been to the Patriot League Final 6 times, and his team has played in the NCAA tournament 4 times if you include this year. Above all else, Langle's teams win in the postseason. That's something the Temple men have struggled to do the last couple years.
And we're not the only ones throwing out this name. Coach Langle joined Zach Gelb on CBS Sports Radio on Monday to discuss his team making the NCAA tournament. Gelb, who happens to be a former Owl Sports Update anchor here in TV Studio 3, asked about the rumors and the idea of being wanted for other jobs on larger stages.
Well, with your success, your name does pop up in other jobs. Just how do you navigate that with your guys currently? Does that come up in conversation or not a distraction right now?
Yeah, for us, it's not a distraction. I think we have great relationships with our players. They're all really focused on their opportunity at hand. I think for me and hopefully for them, it's flattering when that happens in the media that your name pops up, because it's all the work that they've done and how they've positioned this program. But they know that my commitment is to them, and this opportunity always that I pour everything we have into helping them get as prepared as they can be for Thursday night.
That's enough talking about the men's side of things. When we return, we will give our thoughts on the women's season when Courts in Session returns.
We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to Courts in Session. Even with the women's basketball season ending just about a week ago, head coach Diane Richardson has already turned her sights on next season.
It was definitely a learning process. We had a lot of ups and downs, and quite frankly, I'm glad it's over. I'm planning on next season already. So, it was a transition.
The women dealt with a lot of ups and downs this season, which is something you tend to expect with a new head coach, but the future looks bright with Diane Richardson as the face of the program.
Coach Richardson and her squad are looking to build on an 11-18 season, capped by a 9th place finish in the AAC.
Looking at the women's season as a whole, there were some positives, but also some negatives. Aaliyah Nelson was one of the bright spots for this team, averaging just over 15 points per game and scoring her 1,000th career point this season. Her efforts also earned her second-team all-conference honors. Terriana Gary is someone else who caught my eye, shooting 37% from three-point range. And Tierra East took a huge leap this year, scoring just about 12 points per game and pulling down almost 6 boards per game. With 4 players either leaving or being kicked off the team this season, it was impressive. Temple played a long stretch of games with only 8 players. In the offseason, I think one of those priorities should be finding a center and another ball handler. But now we turn it over to Emilie Cochrane, who's live at the studio set.
Thanks, guys. You could tell the women were fatigued by the fourth quarter for sure, but 2 specific plays stand out to me as game changers as the clock ran down. Let's take a look. Tierra East with the ball right here. The Owls are down by 2. She's trying to figure out what she wants to do with it, but she eventually loses possession of the ball. But Terriana Gary comes to the rescue, tries to shoot it up before the clock runs out, but they end up turning over the ball. Now, this is the very next time the Owls have possession of the ball. Aaliyah Nelson trying to figure out what to do, dishes it to Coranda Perea, pulls it right here. You can see she's still got 19 seconds left on the clock, but if you see Brittany Gardner right here, she's eyeing her up. You can play it, and she passes it to her right over her head, right out of bounds, and you can see she's upset with that outcome. But after the play, they could not gain any momentum or stop Wichita from scoring. Guys, back to you.
Emily, now with this team going forward, I can guarantee one thing. They'll have more bodies next season. Brittany Garner's the only one of 8 on the roster who will officially not return next season. As for next season's team, there needs to be an emphasis on getting more out of the forward and center positions, as Brielle mentioned. Especially look at defense and rebounding. Starting with the defense, Owls were tied for 3rd best shot blocking team in the AAC, but on the other end, they were the worst in points allowed per game. Now rebounding, TR East had a good season leading Temple in rebounding. That number was still under 6 per game. Temple was near the bottom of the conference in rebounding. If the Owls can snag a dominant rebounder and impact defender to complement the trio of Nelson, Gary, and East, this team should make a jump in the standings next season.
That is all the time we have today for this edition of Courts in Session, and for the entire CIS crew, have a wonderful rest of your day.